Some 4K 60. I've changed the frequency to NTSC because I want to get some 60 frames out of the 4K. I just want those 10 extra frames, and I will conform it in post to my base time rate of 25p. But I am recording sound, meter going. I have my VideoMic Pro on there just to get a little bit of Atmos. But I probably need to stop talking if I want to get any decent sound. This camera doesn't shoot in 4K over 30 frames per second. So yeah, I could slow it down to 25p and it would give me a tiniest amount. Wouldn't really register slow motion. But it does do HD at 50 and 60, and it also does HD in 100 and 120. And it is cropped though, which isn't a bad thing sometimes, because I'm going to put on that same lens, a long lens 7200, and it's going to give me effectively a 140 to 400mm focal length, which is going to be nice for getting those really long distance shots. The real downside to that is if you are shooting some 50 and 60p and you just want to get a little bit slower than that, suddenly you're much tighter and you'll have to go on a different lens. That's why I prefer my cameras to shoot slow motion without cropping. If it has an option of cropping as well, like some cameras do, then great. If you are just stuck with a crop, I tend to prefer ones which don't, so I don't have to change my lenses. And I think I'm actually going to mount it on the lens just to take a little bit of strain away from the lens mount. There we go. So this is in HD, and this is what it looks like when I conform it down to slow motion. I'm essentially playing it back at 50% speed. But I'm going to go to 100 frames now and look at the size of the frame change. It's a huge difference, much longer. It's great for picking off these shots. Not so great if you actually want to get wide shots. I'd have to go on a wider lens. But there's definitely an advantage at times to having a camera that can crop in slow motion. But yes, I would rather have a camera that can crop and not crop. Ah, the good old slow motion montage. These were shots taken during filming of The Wonderlist in different places around the world. If you watch the actual episodes, the amount of slow motion is not obviously continuous. It is mixed in with real time. But it is nice to edit them together, put it to some nice music, and just let it relax over you. One thing we're going to talk about later on and show you is the concept of speed ramping, where you actually record in slow motion, but you do speed ups and then go to slow motion and then go back to speed up again. This is a really nice way of using your slow motion shots. The higher the frame rate we go, it does of course mean we have to have shutter speed to compensate. The higher the shutter speed, the more light we need. Of course right now it's lovely, we have daylight, the sun's out, it's beautiful. I actually have ND on right now because I have too much light. But the darker it goes, the later it gets, we're going to have these issues of light and how much we have. In fact, I do actually have my first issue with interference because I'm focused right now down on this street. And you can see in the distance that shop has a light on inside and it is flickering. This is my first issue. I'm only getting it though at 180 frames per second with my 360th of a second shutter. When I drop down to 4K 50 and at 100th of a second, I have no issues. So it's 50p, 50th of a second, double, it's nice and safe at 100th of a second. Just remember, when you are shooting in slow motion, any camera moves you do are going to be a lot slower when you actually play it back, especially if you're shooting at that higher frame rate. So I did this rack focus from leaves onto this group of people sat down, and my move on the actual barrel was really fast. It's like a whip focus. If you do it at normal speed, you play it back, it will take like 20 seconds. Way too slow. Same when you're actually moving the camera. This is really the only time you're going to whip pan the camera, unless you like that 80s MTV style. The only time. Just switch to a wider lens. So I want to do a little bit of movement, as in some whip pans I just talked about. So let's find something to whip with. It's gone a bit quiet. Okay. I'm waiting for somebody or something to move in front of my camera so I can do a nice whip with them, and it looks really nice on camera. This is a great example of interference. This shop is that 3 for 2. It's flickering away at 180 degree shutter speed, which is 360th of a second at 180p. So I'm going to switch to 4K and show you it disappearing. It'll still be slow motion, but only at 50p. And there you go. No flicker. Yay. Interference and flickering with your shutter speed is your #1 enemy when shooting high frame rates. I shot this in New York in January 2016 during Snowpocalypse. It's all shot at 240 frames per second. So your shutter speed is at least 1/480th of a second, which is going to interfere with everything. And Times Square has screens galore, and the amount of flickering and interference I had was enormous. And the way that I got it to work was using a plugin called Flicker Free from Digital Anarchy. I'm never a fan of fixing it in post, but there is no other option for this sort of thing. There is no shutter speed, there is no way of shooting this without getting flicker. The downside to using this plugin, well, first off, it takes forever to render, and you have to experiment a lot with the settings until it looks good, because what it's doing is it's blending frames, and so it can create motion blur, which is not really what you want. But what else can you do? If you wanted to capture this in slow motion, there is no other option other than simply shooting at no higher than 60 frames per second. And that's not enough for me. I switched to this video camera here, and this has a number of options. When I'm using the record out, I am able to do continuous slow motion in 2K up to 200 frames per second when shooting in that 50i PAL mode. I'm going to show you how to use the buffered mode in a bit, but first off I'm going to film Julian and Sarah dancing randomly in this shopping area in Hereford Town Centre at 200 frames per second.
Taking in the skyline, keep on the straight line, pull up at the park, and some bitch
As the bells strike for almost an end of a shooting day, I want to add a little bit more to this with some motion. This was really nice, but very static. There's a lot of motion going on in the screen. With this, I'm going to go in there and get some nice shots. I only have a buffer though when shooting in high frame rate of about 4 seconds, and I'm going to shoot at 250 frames a second. It does go up to 500 and 1000, but it's not great at that. This camera also does a buffer recording. I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that in a second, but first off, I think I'm going to get that shot over there, these guys. Four seconds may not seem that much, but the shot I just did with Julian and Sarah dancing, when you play it, it's actually quite a lot. Now, when you do go into the edit, you don't really want to play that whole thing because it's too slow and too boring. Speed ramps should be used, so you record at your high frame rate and then bring it into edit, you speed up the shot and then you put a little slice through it and then have it back to its normal slow motion speed. And that way you get a really nice normal speed, and then when you get to the key moments, it just slows down. What I'm going to do right now is subject Julian to some cold water on his head. He's been complaining how hot he is all day, so this is his reward. Going to film him. I'm going to try and use the 4K 100 frames per second, which means I've only got 4 seconds to grab it in. I am going to use the end trigger mode. So basically I have to count the 4 seconds in my head. It's constantly buffering, constantly recording, and then when I hit record, it's going to save that last 4 seconds at 100 frames per second. It's going to take me, to get the timing right, maybe 5 or 6 attempts. Sorry, Julian. What? No! Okay, I am going to screw this up. And everybody ready? In 3, 2, 1, action.
I said not on my shorts.
I think we got it. Let's have a look. Thank you very much. That's my shirt. I had my little Sony RX100 Mark IV modified to shoot infrared, which is taking out the infrared blocker and then adding different filters on top. I have blog posts which go into it. I don't want to focus on that here. The special thing about this camera is it shoots at 250, 500, 1000 frames per second in HD. Although, to be honest with you, only the 250 is really usable, but it only does it in a 2-second buffer. So all I could do was record 2 seconds of real-time video, and then it would spend about 40 seconds writing it to the card. So it took me quite some time to accumulate enough shots for an edit, with just being able to get one shot every 42 seconds essentially, but it was worth it.